Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wrist Watch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we have a beautiful Rolex GMT Master from the mid to late 60s. And as you can see, this watch was worn. Whoever owned this thing really wore it. And this watch is actually a very special watch. It comes to me from a member of my Patreon named Drew. This watch belonged to his grandfather. Now, his grandfather sadly passed away, but the watch remains. And this was the type of watch that was worn. And I mean, really worn every day to work. Take a look. You can see the watch on the wrist of his grandpa here way back in the day when he worked on heavy machinery. Here he is with, grandkids in tow wearing the watch and even great grandkids as well. And this grandpa just lived a crazy life. This is him in his 70s doing parasailing. And he's wearing the watch too, by the way. This watch right here that ended up on my bench. Now, the watch is running, so that's the good news. But as you can see, it's pretty beat up. It needs some tender loving care. The crystal's pretty scratched up. The bezel is beautifully faded. And the watch just generally needs a service and hopefully to be able to run a little bit better, because the owner, Drew, he is actually a watch fan. He's got a nice little watch collection going. And he took this watch and put it on his own time grapher. He has his own to see how it was running, and it wasn't running very well. As you can see here, he sent me a photo of how it was doing. It's losing about 30 seconds a day. The amplitude's a little low and the beat error is off at 0.8 milliseconds. So we need to address those things so that he can take this watch and continue to wear it so that it stays in the family and it can be something to remind Drew of his grandfather, who is very close with and who, like I said, wore this watch every day. This is really what some of the most special watches are the ones that a loved one wore every single day. And as you can see, there is some evidence that this watch was worn. Oh my God. I have never seen the level of buildup here in this end link. And this is going to be a cleaning job, no doubt about it, on this watch. I'm going to take a piece. Oh my God. I'm going to take a piece of pegwood here and get it cleaned out before we put it into the ultrasonic cleaner, because the ultrasonic's better at kind of finishing the cleaning job rather than taking off major chunks here, which is what we've got all over the bench now. And I'm going to assume that that's how it's going to look for the duration here. So let's take out the spring bar. And we can continue taking apart the bracelet here. We have to take the bracelet off before we can get into the watch itself, as you might imagine. And I need to do a little bit of cleaning here because, yikes. This watch has not been serviced in years and years and years and years. And you know why? Because he wore it. That's why. He woke up in the morning and he put this thing on. This isn't the... God. This isn't the type of watch that was held in some, pristine safe or in a box. This watch is very valuable. The sentimental value for the owner is off the charts. But, in dollar value, these watches go for 20 grand easy for something like this. They're highly, highly collectible. They're one of Rolex's most popular models. And this is the, one of the original of it. They make a GMT Master 2 now as well. This is just the regular GMT Master from before. And taking a look here, you can actually see, oh yeah, so that lug, or that end link is what it's called, is bent. And that will make the bracelet move around a bit more than it needs to, and we'll probably need to address that at some point here during the restoration as well. The owner asked to keep the watch as original as possible. And that's something that I like to do in many scenarios as well. You can see there's more dirt and buildup here underneath the end link where the lugs are. So yeah, again, I'm just going to use the pegwood here to kind of take the big pieces off, and we'll let the ultrasonic finish it up. But, keeping things original has a collectible nature, but in this case, it's not that. It's because this is the watch that his grandpa wore, and he wants to wear the watch that his grandpa wore. So we're going to do our best to keep this one about as original as we possibly can. And we'll start off by taking off the back of the watch, which does actually come off with the rubber ball, and Yeah, that's a Rolex movement, all right. It looks actually quite nice, and as you can see, it is running. This is what I hope to see, right? I mean, we knew that it was running, so that part was fine, but this thing looks clean and like it's in good shape. We'll start by taking off this gasket. We'll probably want to replace that and see how the rotor... Oh, do you see that crack in the rotor there? Huh. I wonder how his grandpa did that. This watch has, again, really seen a life. This is the type of thing that you can't reproduce. There's been a big push in the Swiss watch and every watch industry over the past maybe 5 to 8 years or so to make watches that are reproductions of vintage watches, or even try to look like they are actually vintage watches. There's something you've probably never heard of unless you're super into the watch thing. It's called fauxtina, which is, two words combined. It's patina and then faux as in fake. And these companies will actually try to make parts that would normally look worn over the course of the life of a watch, look worn even though it's brand new, which is kind of funny. And an interesting thing you'll see here when I take this off, take a look at the GMT hand. That's the one with the red stripe on it there. It's dark. The lume on it is what you would expect from a watch from the 60s, and the rest looks very bright and white. And there's a reason for that. This watch has what they call a service dial and also service hands, except for some reason, the hour hand did not. I don't know if that was requested to stay on or if they didn't have an extra one, but they left it. And you can see the difference in what happens to what we call the lume. That's the luminescent material on the dial. One of them is what looks like when that dial has been exposed to air and UV, sunlight, all that kind of stuff over the years, it turns into this sort of dark cream kind of color. And that's a natural effect of aging for this type of material. But if you look, the rest is very white. And what that means is that this watch was taken in for service probably 30 plus years ago, and it was given a new set of hands and a new dial from Rolex. So they're not fake. It's just a service dial, meaning that if at any point when you send your watch to a company like Rolex, they will usually replace any part that has any amount of wear on it. And that even extends to visible parts like the dial and hands. And while collectors cringe at that because it devalues the watch and it also takes away a lot of the natural wear, it was common practice for the time. And in fact, very often you will see service dials and hands on Rolex watches from this era. And this one has one as well. The good news is it looks great. I mean, the dial's in really great shape and so are the hands. Okay, so what are we going to do here? Well, we are going to start by completely disassembling this watch. Every single part we are going to take apart on this thing. I know that's kind of crazy, but that is how it works for watchmaking and watch repair. Then we are going to clean all of the parts, and then we're going to reassemble this whole entire movement, get it running about as well as we can, see if there's any other issues to be addressed, and get it reassembled and back on the wrist of the owner. Now, the first thing we need to do here is I'm going to take off the calendar wheel as well as a calendar mechanism on this side. The main reason to do this at this point is because it will give us access to the cannon pinion. And the cannon pinion is a part that we need to take off if we're going to take off the mechanical part of the watch on the other side, the part that actually makes it keep time. And removing this gives us access to the cannon pinion. This is actually a tool designed specifically to remove the cannon pinion, which is that part sticking up right there, and boom, pops it right off. Now we can turn the movement over and start disassembling the running works of it. So this is the part of the watch, of course, that actually keeps time. These Rolex movements are an absolute joy to work on. They are beautifully constructed. They are bulletproof. And they were also made in many ways with the watchmaker in mind so that they're able to be serviced in an efficient, reasonable manner. One thing about them that's kind of interesting is that while they do use some decoration on the movement, you see those sort of small circles that are all over the flat surfaces that give it that kind of shiny look. That's called perlage. It's applied with a machine that looks kind of like a drill, but instead of a drill bit at the end, it has a polishing wheel, a little tiny one, and you overlap those across as you go around the movement to give it that kind of three-dimensional decorative look. But it is interesting because in the world of high-end watches, that's kind of basic. Like doing perlage on the movement is like, okay, that's cool, but like you're going to need to do more than that to get the kind of the praise from the really high-end movements. And the truth is that this isn't a really high-end movement. This is a workhorse. This was designed to last forever. And they put a little bit of effort into the decoration, but that's not the focus. What is going on with the bottom of the ratchet wheel here? There's some... Oh boy. That is a lot of grease. Interesting. Wow, and it's actually coming out of the barrel. I wonder if that's in the barrel itself or if it was some type of lubricant around that bearing that the person who last serviced this used. But there should not be that much coming out. You don't want to see that type of grease around, especially if it happens to be like a graphite or type of grease. That isn't really used in watchmaking because it can be abrasive. At any rate, let's take the click and the click spring out. I have to be very, very careful with the little click spring because it can jump away. And now we can take off the crown wheel. This is held on by two very small screws, as you can see. And we can just remove these and then remove the crown wheel itself. It's made up of 3 parts. There's kind of an outer ring, an inner ring, and then a kind of a washer at the bottom. Everything looks good here, though. And there's that washer that I was talking about. Okay, now we can take off the train wheel bridge, which goes right over the top of all the train wheels here. The train wheels are probably what you think of when you think of what's inside of a watch. The little gears and wheels. These are those wheels / gears, whatever you want to call them. Now we do have to be careful with removing this because there are pivots. Think of it being like the axle of a wheel, and they are long and they break sometimes. Okay, so this comes off and everything looks good here as well. For as hard as this watch was worn on the outside, not too much going on the inside as far as wear or damage or anything approaching that. So that's a relief. And that'll make the restoration a lot more straightforward. Hopefully not finding anything broken. Okay, so with the train wheels out, we can shift our attention here to the pallet fork. It's held on by a small bridge. And as you can see, this movement coming apart very nicely. It doesn't really fight us much. There's not really any issues to be seen thus far. And this is kind of why it's really nice to work on really well-made, really well-thought-out movements like this one. Okay, now that leaves us with the barrel bridge, and that's holding on the mainspring barrel, which is that big brass barrel that you see, that wheel. So let's take this off. And there, that's the mainspring barrel coming out now. We'll have to take a look inside of that to see what's up with that grease. This part here is an interesting one. It's called a hack. And a hack is just a way to stop the watch from running. This one is actually built in so that when you pull the crown out to set the time, it slides that little brass lever forward, which touches one of the wheels that I just took out and stops the entire watch from running. And this lets you set your watch to the exact second if you'd like. For the most part, that's not really necessary, but you know, there are some applications like flying or military or something like that where you actually would want to. It also allows you to hack or sync your watch with other people's watches if you're doing some type of an operation that requires you all to have the exact same time. Watches without a hack, you pull that out and they just continue to run. Okay, so the keyless works can come apart. Keyless works is the part that allows you to do that, pulling out the crown, setting the time, winding the watch, that whole thing. And now we can flip the watch over to remove what is left of the calendar works and what we call the motion works. The calendar works is self-explanatory. The motion works are the little gears and wheels that control the hands themselves. And this watch has a little bit extra going on because there is a minute, hour, and second hand. But then there's an additional hour hand that you can set so that, again, you can set the time to an additional time zone rather than the one you're in. Ooh, yeah, that setting lever had some gunk on it. So this is a good time to clean that up. Now I can take off the yoke spring, being very, very careful. That's a heavy spring for a watch. And if you get it crooked, it will jump. But it didn't this time. Because I've had that happen a bunch of times and I'm a little more careful. Okay, this is a calendar jumper spring. That's the thing that actually puts some tension on that calendar ring with the numbers on it so that when it spins around, it clicks over. And we can take that out. And below that, there we go. There's a very large spring that pushes up against a calendar cam. And a cam is, it allows power to be slowly built up and then released all at once. And in fact, this actually has a jewel on the bottom side of it where it interacts with that cam so that there's less friction and so that it's smoother. You can see that jewel sitting there. It's kind of a donut shaped jewel and it just sits on a little metal post on the bottom of this arm. And I can just take it off here and there it is. But again, given that that's under significant spring tension, you got to be careful with it. Okay, now to prepare for cleaning, I can put the balance back on. And the reason to do this is that hairspring, that blue spring that you see in the middle there, it is extraordinarily fragile. And if it gets bent, the watch will not run correctly. So we put that back on to protect it. Okay, let's take a look inside this barrel now and see. Oh boy, yeah. Oh, that is a grease bomb in there for sure. So somebody used, wow, that is just a lot of grease in that. You shouldn't have anywhere near that much. The mainspring will run almost completely dry, like a thin film of grease on there to make sure that it doesn't develop any corrosion or stick together is recommended. But this is like an insane amount of grease. I mean, oof. In fact, let's just see. Is there enough grease in here that I can? Yeah, there is. So I can actually write a note to you, my viewer, in the grease of it. That's too much. You don't want to see anywhere near that much. And also you can see how dark it is. It actually can attract dirt. Okay. One last thing to take apart here before we get to the cleaning process, and that is the automatic winding works. This watch is an automatic. Most Rolexes are. The word that they use is perpetual. If you see that on the front of a Rolex where it'll say like Oyster Perpetual, Oyster means that it's water resistant to a certain amount. Again, that's a Rolex term. And then perpetual means that it's an automatic. And you can see this rotor, yeah, we're going to need to address that. It actually is broken. And I wonder what in the heck his grandpa did to somehow snap the rotor inside of the watch. And by the way, it doesn't seem to have affected the running of the watch. Normally you'd be able to see, you can see it here, by the way. Do you see that where it's disconnected and it's supposed to be over here? So yeah, we'll have to take a look at that at some point down the line, but normally you'll see where it drags up against other parts, but that didn't seem to be the case here. Okay, so now we need to put everything into these cleaning baskets, the automatic winding works, the motion works, the keyless works, all of the drivetrain stuff from the front, and the plates, everything is going to go in this basket outside of a few items like the dial and the hands and stuff because the cleaning solution is way too tough for those that would take the paint off. And now we can put them into the watch cleaning machine. This takes them through a 3-step process of a kind of solvent that you see here, and then 2 rinses, as well as a drying cycle. So I guess 4 steps in total. And while the watch is cleaning, I did want to mention, I've got a Patreon for this channel. Patreon's a cool website where you can give back to the creators that you really like, the stuff that people that make stuff that you enjoy, especially independent creators like me. We really appreciate it if you take the time to check out our Patreons. And I did want to say thanks to everybody over on the Patreon. Okay, back to business here. While the movement is cleaning, we need to deal with the case. So what that means is, first we need to take off the bezel. The bezel is the outermost part here that is a steel ring with an aluminum insert in this case. And then there's a spring here that holds tension on the bezel. As you can see, it wasn't really doing much because of the amount of debris that has gotten under here. And now there's another piece that holds down the crystal and keeps it watertight. So back to the bezel removal tool again, and we can remove that. This is a great little tool because it hits it from 4 sides, where normally you would do it with like a case knife, which can introduce some prying force that isn't really great when it's only on one side. So yeah, we can take off this retainer ring here. Again, this gets press fit back on over the crystal, and wow, there's even dirt under there. Actually quite a significant amount as well. This watch needs a cleaning like nobody's business. And now we can remove the crystal. Now it's a little bit jammed on, so I'm just going to use a knife with a fine blade here to just get it just a little bit lifted up off of there, and we can remove the crystal as well. And oh no. So taking a look, it looks like the crystal actually has some cracks on the side. Now, that doesn't seem to be affecting the integrity of the crystal itself, but it could affect the waterproofness. Now we can also, take out we already took out the gasket on the back, case back, and this one goes inside the crown tube. There is actually another gasket. There's 3 that these Rolex watches take to retain waterproofness. And while it's not usually realistic to assume that a watch of this age in this condition would be water resistant to its original spec, we can try to get it as close as possible so that the owner can wear it and not have to worry about if he gets caught out in the rain, or if he needs to wash his hand, or, whatever happens, right? So what we're going to do now is put all of the case parts into the ultrasonic cleaner, give them a nice solid bath. Oh man, look how much darker that water got after. Yeah, there was a lot of dirt in there, no doubt about it. And now we can take the parts out. I can't even see where they're at. Let's just, oh boy, you can see the dirt. So a lot of dirt in this watch, though that was anticipated given how long it had been since it had been serviced. But it looks like it's cleaned up pretty nicely here. There's the case back. That, of course, is the bezel and the crystal as well. Okay. So now we've got the case all cleaned up, as well as the movement parts and all that. And we can take a look at the movement parts, by the way, post-cleaning, and they look beautiful. This is all the parts for the watch, all cleaned up. You can see the case, the bezel, there's the spring. Yes, there's the movement, all the wheels, everything that goes into it. So first things first, I talked to the owner and I said I would be totally fine with using the mainspring again, but this watch has not been serviced in a very long time, and it would be appropriate to replace the mainspring. He agreed, and so we tracked down a genuine Rolex replacement mainspring, which I'll be putting in now. This does make life a little bit easier just because you can just put it in straight away like this. These come lubricated from the factory. They're ready to go. You don't need to do anything special to them. You just simply press them into place by putting them into that barrel, and it's a done deal. The only lubrication you need to do on watches like this when you're using a new mainspring is you have to put a little bit of what they call braking grease around the inside of the barrel, which I did here. And that means that when the mainspring gets fully wound, it will slide around the edge or slide less because of the braking grease, which is what you want. Okay, so spring goes in. Now we can put the lid on. And I've got a little plastic tool here that helps me secure the lid. It just simply pushes down on all sides at once so that the lid can be secured back on safely. Okay, and we can put the barrel back into the movement here, make sure that it spins freely. Now, if you noticed, when I took out the little hack mechanism, I actually just replaced the screw. That's kind of a unique screw, and I just thought, well, it won't hurt it to just have it sitting in there. And so I'm going to put that back in just so that I know exactly that it's the correct screw for it, and then I can simply put the hack mechanism back into place here. I have to do this now because this actually does get covered up by one of the bridges. I think the barrel bridge covers this one up, and if you don't put it on now, you won't be able to go back and do it later without some pretty serious disassembly. So now we just make sure that it can slide back and forth, which is what we need it to do, and it does. And now we can start with the real reassembly here, which are the train of wheels. We'll start with the escape wheel, then move to the fourth wheel. And now we can take the third wheel. And as you can see, this is the one that gets touched by that hack mechanism. If you look closely, you can see where there's a little lip on it. And when it pulls back over, it touches the third wheel and stops the whole movement. It's all it takes. That's why people are so crazy about, you know, how much lubricant to use on these things, not letting any dust or debris get in while you're reassembling. It doesn't take much to stop an entire watch. Okay, the center wheel can go in. It gets a little bit of medium viscosity oil before being put into place. And you can get a good look here at how the movement works with the barrel on the left going, or now on the bottom, going all the way down to the escape wheel. Okay, now I can put on the barrel bridge. And as I mentioned, this covers up both the hack and also the setting lever, which I've also put into place. Excuse me, the setting lever screw. Okay, there we go. Really hoping I can get this watch running well for its owner. I had a chance to meet him. We met up. We were able to meet up in person to hand off this watch, and you could tell two things. One, he really loved his grandpa, and this watch really was like a symbol, you know, of his grandpa's. You saw from the photos, he wore it every day to all types of occasions for the now owner's entire life. So he really kind of associates him with it. And two, this is the type of person that wants to wear this stuff. Like he, you know, I told him, hey, you know, this is quite a valuable watch. He didn't care at all. He's just like, I am going to wear this thing and I can't wait to do so. And I'm really hoping to get it running and operating well so that he can enjoy it for years to come and maybe even pass it down to his children. Okay, so now we've got the train wheel bridge and the barrel bridge in place. Those are the two big bridges on the top, and we can continue with now the click spring. The click and the click spring are, you can think of them like a ratchet, right? And you know, a ratchet being something that allows something to turn one direction, but not the other. And that's, of course, important when you're winding up a watch, because when you wind it one direction, if you let go, you can't have it just unwind all back again, right? It needs to be able to wind and hold what you've wound, let you reset your thumb, and then do it again. And that's what this mechanism does. It's very simple. You know, there's nothing really complicated here. It just rubs against the teeth of that wheel. And when it springs backwards, the way that that little click is designed, it stops it, but it's designed such that it can allow it to spin one direction. And that, of course, is really important here. Okay, so now we can get that ratchet wheel in place. And as you can see, it's working beautifully here as the bottom is able to spin freely, because currently there's nothing holding it in place. There will be in a little bit, though. Now we can put on the crown wheel. Yeah, it doesn't hurt working on these on this type of watch either, that this is like one of my favorite watch models ever. Just full stop. I absolutely love the GMT Master. This is a 1675. That's kind of it's not the actual original one. There is an older one, but it's quite rare, and you don't really, I've never even you don't see them in real life. But these ones you'll see around, and they are absolutely awesome. Cool story behind them. They're beautiful. They have that nice splash of color on the bezel. They're just great. Okay, so now we can tighten down the crown wheel here. And I'm going to use a little bit of the medium viscosity oil on the bottom, of the barrel where it meets with the case. And as you can see, I got a little bit too much on there, so I'm just going to use some Rodico to clean that up. Rodico is it's a blue kind of a putty. If you've ever played with silly putty before when you were a kid, it reminds you of that. It's it feels a little different in your hand, but it's pretty close. And it allows you to, you can clean up oil with it. You can do light cleaning on parts with it. You can mold it to hold parts while you're working on them. You can use it to hold a part in place so that it doesn't fly away. There's so many different uses for that stuff. It's really invaluable, especially when you're first starting out. What I found is the better I get at this, the less I need the Rodico, but it's always really good to have it. Okay, a little bit of the high viscosity grease here on the crown and stem, and we can insert those and get that tied down. So now things are really starting to come together here on this side of the watch. This is the side of the watch, by the way, that has the motion works, which I mentioned are what run the hands, and also the calendar works is on this side. This side of the watch is what we call the dial side, and I think you can probably figure out why we call it that. So I can put the cannon pinion back into place. And now I can put the setting lever in as well. I put the minute wheel in as well. That brass wheel that I put in is what turns at the correct rate for the minutes to go around. And again, this blue stuff you see me using is a kind of a heavy grease. And it's for metal on metal, especially when there's friction, when there's something like a spring holding something in place, you want to use that grease so that you don't risk any damage over time, but also so that like you don't get little shavings of that metal in the movement. That's a big no-no. And as you can see, things just go right back together with these Rolex movements. They're such a pleasure to work on. Okay, and I'm going to put grease between the setting lever and the yoke is what we call it, and a little bit between the yoke spring and the yoke as well. But I've actually put on a bit too much here. You don't want excess like that. So once again, Rodico to the rescue. So I'm going to use that to just clean up any excess that ended up getting on there. You actually want to use, about as little as you can, and that's why that was a bit too much. Now the setting lever spring can go on. And once we get that tightened down, I can apply a little bit more of this grease where the spring touches the setting lever. And again, just to clean it up, not have excess on there. There we go. And now we can flip the movement back over and put the pallet fork in place. Now we're getting close. This is the point where, as a watchmaker, of course you remain calm, because if you get too nervous or excited, it can affect your work. But this is where you start thinking, okay, come on, right? I want this thing to run. I don't want any issues. I want it to run really well. I hope I didn't screw anything up. These are the things that go through your head as you get to this stage of the restoration, because this is where the rubber meets the road. I'm going to put a little bit of a wind into the watch and make sure that the pallet fork works. But once I confirm that it does, this balance is going back on, and we're going to see if this bad boy is going to run. And then furthermore, how well it's going to run, after we get the rest of the restoration stuff done. So gentle, a little bit of tweaking here to get the jewels. Look at that. It just started up straight away. No hesitation whatsoever. Thank you, Rolex, for making such a great movement. I mean, seriously, these things are just so sweet. And I worked on so many different types of movements now, you know, doing this channel. You and I have been through a lot of journeys together. This is the lightest viscosity oil, by the way, because now we need to oil the jewels. So the jewels on the top of the watch are these red rubies, which, by the way, are absolutely gorgeous in color. I love the way they look contrasted with the brass and the metal colors that we have here. And what these are bearings, meaning that there's a piece of metal that spins within them, and you'll see it there. Do you see a little tiny post of metal? That spins in there, and these are synthetic rubies that are actually just one below diamonds on the hardness scale. They're extremely hard, and that means that they don't wear. Now, usually when you go up in hardness, you also go up in brittleness, which is also true here. So you do have to be careful with these jewels and how you construct the movement. But most watches aren't under that much force. These can shatter. I've seen it happen before, but they do require quite a bit of force to do so. And as long as they don't shatter, they basically don't wear at all. Like, it does happen sort of, but it takes a really, really long time and a really, really bad situation to get these jewels to wear. And so what I'm doing here is just putting a little tiny drop of oil on the top of this cap jewel, and then I can replace it on the top, and that will suspend the oil right above that little tiny pivot there where the metal meets the oil, and it'll allow it to run freely, about as free as you can get friction-wise, for a very, very long time. These rubies are a really great bearing for a piece of metal like this. Now I can put a little bit of the medium viscosity oil here around the center wheel, and now it's time to take apart and clean the upper shock setting and jewels. So the way this works is that little brass thing is a spring. You move it out of the way and you take out the part underneath. It actually came off in a half here. So there's the top half of it. It's the same thing like before. It's a cap jewel. But in this case, underneath it, which I need to use Rodico to try to fish out of there. There we go. Now it came out. Is the jewel setting. That is called the hole jewel or the jewel setting. It has the hole in it that the pivot goes in. The cap sits on top with oil sandwiched in between and suspends that oil for as long as the oil remains viable. And that'll allow the watch to run at peak optimal speed and for as long as possible. So again, the trick here is I'm trying to put no, not quite, a tiny droplet of oil directly in the middle of that jewel. And now I can take the bottom setting. I know it's going on top, but when we put it in the watch, it'll be on the bottom like that. And they'll stick together because of that capillary action from the oil. And then I can simply drop it back into place and replace this upper spring here. That spring, by the way, is there in case you drop your watch so that that pivot doesn't smash into the jewel and break it. Instead, it just bends that little spring and we can just fire it back up and everything looks good as far as oiling the jewels go. Okay, so that part's done. Now let's just take a quick look as we continue the reassembly. I need to try to line up this piece of metal with the under part of this rotor again. And there we go. I actually did it. And what I'm going to do here is use just a tiny, tiny bit of epoxy to just sort of smooth over that part. I'm not going to actually like add any weight or epoxy to the part in any significant amount. I'm basically just going to use it to fill in the jagged part of where those things meet up again. And as you can see, I'm just going to flatten it down and smooth it so that it's actually just like a tiny fraction of the actual epoxy. And that's just going to give me peace of mind that those two parts will hold together better for the long term. Again, this was the decision of the owner. He wanted to keep as many parts original as possible. And to me, there's very little risk in using this rotor again. Now we need to put back together the automatic works. And what I just dipped these in is a combination of cleaner and oil. It's kind of an interesting thing where it sits in there. It'll dissolve any of the debris or anything that's on it. But when it dries, it leaves like a lubricant layer on it as well. And that's what's needed for these purple wheels. These are called reversing wheels. And that's because they allow this rotor to spin either direction, yet still wind up the watch, which is only spun and turned in one direction. It's a really genius little way to do this. And Rolex also coats them in a kind of a Teflon or some type of friction material, and it turns them this purple color, apparently. This has its own little bridge that we put together. And basically this mechanism allows it so that you don't have to wind your watch. It will wind itself as you move around. As you move your arm, this rotor, this heavy weight that's on the outside will spin around. And regardless of which direction it actually spins, it will put, every time it spins, a little tiny wind into the watch, as if you would turn the crown like a half of a turn. And as you wave at your friend, it does another half of a turn. And as you write down your name on a piece of paper, it does another half of a turn. And as you wear the watch every day, you never have to wind it. It's really cool. Okay, now the calendar mechanism here, I'm going to put a little bit of oil here where we're going to replace that one donut jewel that I talked about before so that it can spin and move freely. Again, it's tiny, but there we go. And then I can replace this arm. Now this part's going to get a little bit tricky because what needs to happen is I need to have this arm in place and it gets pushed on by this spring, but I need to put the wheel here in that it actually pushes up against in first while that spring and that arm are pulled back. So that's what I'm going to do here. Yes. Okay. I think I got it. Yes. So it is now holding tension on that part, but it makes me really nervous that it might fly away because of how strong that spring is. So I'm trying to keep something holding down this whole thing at all times. In this case, it's the tweezers, and I'll use my other hand to both put the screw into place with another pair of tweezers and then screw it down. And then now that it's screwed down, I can feel a little bit of relief. I'll now put this this screw kind of thing that holds it down on top. It actually screws on reverse, and it's not a regular screw. I don't know if I need a special tool for this. I might have to track one of those down, but 2 tweezers will work for now. Okay, put it on the time grapher. Let's see how it does. Okay, well, that's definitely an improvement, but we've still got some work to do. So let's take a look at the movement. And if you look at the top of the balance, you can see it doesn't have that normal metal arm right there that allows you to adjust the rate. Rolexes don't have that generally. Take a look at this screw in the front of the balance here. It has that star shape, and that's actually how you adjust it. The good news is I have a tool for that. And the tool here is called a microstella tool. And if you look closely at the very tip, it's the same shape. It's that star shape that you use. And what you do is you attach it to the screw, and then you can turn it to adjust the time. Now, just like this. And now I'm going to turn this over to the right. I'm going righty-tighty. That's going to bring that screw inwards, where it will increase the rate of the watch. And after that adjustment, plus the beat error adjustment, let's see how we did on the time grapher. Ooh, much better. Look at that thing. We got it down to 0 seconds a day, 0 beat error, and it is back in business. That is fantastic. That's about the best result you could hope for. And now we can continue with to finish the reassembly of this watch, but I'm thrilled and honestly not that shocked that one of these Rolex movements, even dating back to the 60s, is able to keep track of time at that level. These things are just made so well, and I'm really happy to see that. Okay, now we can replace the calendar wheel. You know, we're going to get the dial, the hands back on here, do a little stuff with the case, and then we'll have a finished product. But first, let's put on the hour wheel, and now we can put on the center seconds pinion. So this is the little tiny thing that you actually attach the seconds hand to, and that turns from this side. And the way it works is actually pretty ingenious. So there's a little tiny spring here that holds that in place and holds some tension on it. And then there's an additional wheel that we're going to put on that is actually attached to one of the train wheels underneath that just has a long pivot that sticks up. And it happens to turn at the exact rate that we want in conjunction with this little pinion. And that is 1 time around the watch per minute, which is a seconds hand. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky operation, as you can see, because this spring is so light that when you screw down the screw, it turns. So you have to use another instrument to kind of line it up and to make sure that it stays in place just like that. Now we can put this extended wheel that I mentioned onto that extended pivot. It's sitting right underneath there. And I'm actually just going to use my hand press tool to put this back on, because it allows me to put kind of even pressure around this wheel so that it seats properly. Just like that. And now we can put on the dial washer, and that means it's time for the dial. Again, this dial is in quite good condition, especially considering that it's very likely a replacement dial. I can screw that into place where the dial screws are on the side of the case to secure it. And now I can make sure that this watch is at midnight. And how do I know that? Because it just turned over the calendar to 5, and now I can put the hands on as if it were midnight. And that way, when the calendar turns over, when the person's wearing it, it should be, at midnight, right around midnight. If it turned over at 3 in the morning, well, they may look at their watch and not understand what day it is if it's past midnight, and they think, oh, well, it's still the 5th. And oh no. Now the hour hand can go on. Again, this watch has 2 hour hands. It has that auxiliary one plus the main one that we're used to. This is the minute hand. These hands look like they were also service hands replaced at the time of service. Okay, that looks like it's lined up correctly. We can press it into place and give it a quick test to make sure that it clicks over the calendar, and there it goes. Looks like maybe a couple of minutes after midnight, but that is acceptable. Now I can put on gently the seconds hand. And now this is how we actually replace the gaskets on these watches, because we need to do that if we're going to get this thing even close to waterproof. So we put them in this little brusher thing that puts silicone grease on the outside of it. And then we push this one, goes into the case tube. And again, these Rolex watches and many dive or, sports watches like these have a 3 gasket setup. Taking a quick look at this, by the way, talked to the owner, and I told him that I was worried about the crack on the side of the crystal and that it may make the watch less waterproof. So he said, okay, let's get a Rolex crystal for the replacement. And so that's what I'm doing here, is just replacing that crystal outright. And again, I mentioned that there's this ring around the base that we have to put on, and I've got a tool that does that. Basically, it allows you to press this down without actually pressing on the crystal itself, because the inside of that die is hollowed out. And this is part of how watches get to be water resistant, is the pressure that this ring is holding around the edge on the crystal creates a watertight seal. So new crystal in place. And I mentioned the gasket for the back. That is also a brand new gasket. And what I'm going to do here is something that I haven't done before on the channel, because I got kind of a new thing. So first things first, we have one more gasket to replace, and that's the one on the inside of the crown. And so I'm going to use a metal pick to try to get in here, and hopefully it's not melted in place. Oh, there we go. Oh, that feels good. I'm not going to lie. Getting that gasket out of there is great. So there it is. And we can take that gasket away. And after cleaning out the inside of that crown again, I've got a new gasket to put into place. Again, a new Rolex gasket going in. And I got a new tool for the workshop that I'm going to try out for the first time on this watch. So after putting everything together, except for not having it in the movement, we're going to test the pressure on this thing and see if it is up to spec. Now, what I need to do first is make sure that everything's screwed down properly. So the crown needs to be down all the way. And then I also need to use my case opening and closing tool here to make sure that there's a proper amount of pressure on that case. And now take a look at what I got. This is a pressure tester. So this is a really cool tool. So the way this works is there's water in there and there's this compression tube. So what I do is I suspend the watch at the top part of the tube where it's in the air. And then I'm going to seal everything down so that it's watertight in that tube. And then I'm going to pressurize the top part with air. Okay. And I'm going to put it at 3 bar. So 3 atmospheres. And what happens is if there's any possible leaks in the watch case, the air will leak into it because molecules are so small, and it will equalize the pressure. So there will be pressure inside of the watch case. Now what I can do is plunge the watch case into water and then release the pressure in the chamber. And if there's leaks, bubbles will come flying out of there. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Hey, that's not too bad. You saw a couple of bubbles come out of the top. So maybe it's not 100% perfect with some of the wear on the case, but you'll see like a stream of bubbles come out if it's not holding, if there's a true leak in it, and you'll just see them flying out of there. So you know what? That's actually pretty good for this thing, especially with the condition that it's in. And look, let's be realistic here. He's not going diving with this watch, right? This thing isn't going to see any pressure. This is wash your hands, get stuck in the rain. Worst case, somebody shoves you in the pool or whatever. And I feel confident that this watch will do just fine in those conditions, which I think is fantastic. Okay, final assembly time. Now we can get the case and the movement back into the case. I cannot believe that this thing passed that pressure test or even came close. I was actually expecting it not to, and I thought that would be cool to show. And it turns out this thing's just bulletproof and didn't care. Okay, now we've got the movement in there. I can secure it into place and replace the automatic winding works as well. You can see that they color-coded the screws. They blued the screws that go on the winding works, the automatic works rather, so you don't get them screwed up with anything else. And just a quick test here to make sure, A, that it's winding, and B, that that this isn't touching or hurting anything else around it because of the damage that we'd seen on it. And it looks great. Once again, I can put this case back on nice and firm, and that will help ensure the watertightness of the back of it as well. Okay, so now the watch is looking fantastic, but there is still the bracelet. Now, you can see the wear on the bracelet. This was also replaced at some point. And of course, the owner said, I want it to look exactly like this. So all I did is clean it in the ultrasonic. But take a look at this spring bar. That tip is completely worn down. This is what it's supposed to look like. And that one actually could have given way at some point. So we're going to replace those. And taking a look, by the way, look how much cleaner this end link looks. But look at this other one. Do you remember back from the beginning I said that there was a bend? There is. That needs to be fixed as well. It will create rattling and excess play. So I've got a pair of flat pliers here that I'm going to use to just gently bend that back to flat. Don't need to be too crazy with this. It's a simple procedure of just gently giving it enough tweak so that that bottom part is flattened out and not sticking up. And yeah, that looks pretty good right there. Let's try putting it on the watch and make sure that everything lines up and looks good. This is one of my favorite tools I have, by the way, is this bolt action spring bar tool. I got it from a guy on Instagram called Hassler Instruments, and it is awesome. It's handmade, you know what I mean? He made it in his shop. So there we go. That looks really, really good. And now we can put the other side on as well. And it looks like we have come to the end here of this Rolex 1675 GMT Master restoration. And this watch is ready to go back on its owner's wrist and hopefully bring him joy and memories of his grandfather for years to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey with this watch. This is really what it's all about for me on this channel. I absolutely love, keeping the family history going and getting these things back on the wrist where they should be worn. And it was a real pleasure to work on this watch. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm there, wristwatch_revival. I'll post pictures of projects, updates, some of my watches from my collection, that kind of stuff. And of course, you can just say hi. Thank you so much once again for hanging out. We'll see you next time.